At the end of last year, when the Shandong aircraft carrier was about to fully form its combat effectiveness, we once imagined that maybe this year, the Shandong ship and the Liaoning ship could be assembled to sail the ocean together to form a dual aircraft carrier battle group. As a result, because the Liaoning ship returned to the factory for maintenance and upgrades, it did not take place for the time being. So far, the Chinese Navy still has only one aircraft carrier, the Shandong ship, on duty. However, what the Chinese Navy has not done for the time being, has been done by our third brother Navy. On June 10, according to the report of the Indian media Eurasia Times, the eastern and western fleets of the Indian Navy launched a large-scale military exercise in the Indian Ocean. The aircraft carrier INS Asia, and the aircraft carrier INS Vikrant, which was just commissioned by the Indian Navy in September 2022. The Indian Navy's elite aircraft carrier battle group. In addition to the two aircraft carriers, the Indian Navy can be described as out of the best. From the photos taken, the Indian Navy also dispatched P-15 Delhi class, P-15A Kolkata class destroyers, Shiwara class frigates, etc. Basically, all the famous warships of the Indian Navy have been pulled out. In addition, according to previous reports, the Indian Navy also successfully implemented night flight training for carrier-based aircraft on the Vikrant. MiG-29 takes off from an aircraft carrier at night. In this situation, the third brother is in a rather excited mood. After all, his two aircraft carriers are showing off their might in the Indian Ocean, and even the Navy may not be able to maintain the existence of two aircraft carriers in the Indian Ocean at the same time. In the face of this magnificent scene, the Indian media Eurasia Times couldn't help but started the report above. In the title of the report used a sensational description, saying that the Indian Navy's dual aircraft carrier exercise in the Indian Ocean, it shows that the Indian Navy has an advantage over the Chinese Navy in the use of aircraft carriers and overall strength. The strength of the Indian Navy. How to understand the honeyjuice confident third brother. Big Ivan feels that it is not a big problem to say that the overall operational level of the Indian Navy can be called the presence of countries around the Indian Ocean sideways. After all, the countries around the Indian Ocean basically have the boats of the South Asian subcontinent, the boats of the local tyrants in the Middle East, and the boats of the black uncles in East Africa. India is a giant among these countries with its national strength, population potential, and technological capabilities. If it weren't for the real outsider of the US Fifth Fleet, the Indian Navy would really be invincible in the entire Indian Ocean area. 3 Indian Navy destroyers docked in Mumbai. After all, look, in the huge Indian Ocean, which country can come up with a dual carrier battle group like India? Not to mention the dual aircraft carrier battle group, if you ask it to come up with a decent destroyer, it may have greater difficulties. Therefore, India now has 2 aircraft carriers, 5 destroyers with regional air defense systems, and is building 7 or 8 new frigates. The mentality is a bit inflated. We should understand this. From the perspective of naval equipment, the Indian Navy is indeed the light of the third world countries. After all, the bug of the Chinese Navy should not be the norm in the third world countries' navies. From the perspective of the Indian Navy has all the main naval equipment that should be available, and it has also crossed many more complicated technical thresholds. For example, in the construction of large surface ships, the Indian Navy can at least build its own aircraft carrier, its own destroyer, and its own frigate, and all of them are well built. In terms of underwater combat equipment, the Indian Navy can manufacture third-generation conventional power submarines by itself by importing technology, and has also developed nuclear submarines by itself, and has certain experience in operating nuclear submarines. India's domestically produced LCA Glory carrier-based fighter. Another example is in terms of aviation warfare equipment, the Indian Navy can not only develop the carrier-based LCA fighter, although it is basically a toy, but also set up a training base for carrier-based aircraft. For the vast majority of third world countries, if the Chinese Navy is not counted, it is basically a Zentradi star-level existence. Inadequacy of the Indian Navy. Of course, although the overall strength of the Indian Navy is a giant compared to most of the third world countries, we will laugh when we get it in front of the Chinese Navy. After all, it is still the above 3 points. The surface ships of the Indian Navy are built by themselves, but it is not clear how many shipboards and armaments are made by India itself. Take the aircraft carrier as an example. How long has it been working on a Vikrant? How many moths have been made in the middle due to engineering coordination problems? and how many ships and electricity are still not actually installed on the ship? The Indians themselves are warm and comfortable, no. In terms of underwater combat equipment, the Indians have the ability to manufacture nuclear submarines, but it is not clear whether nuclear submarines have achieved combat readiness cruise. A few conventionally powered submarines have been built, but why the third brother, after building the Squid class, is going to repeat the construction and plan to introduce the German 214 class, then I am kept in the dark for the time being. Comparison of India's LCA Glory and Su-30 MKI. As for air warfare equipment, the LCA carrier-based aircraft has come out, but it is obviously unusable. At the same time, the MiG-29K/KUB carrier-based aircraft of the Indian Navy continue to crash into the plane, and the two aircraft carrier, it is clear that the carrier-based aircraft establishment cannot be filled. Therefore, the overall strength of the Indian Navy, let's just smile. The significance of India's dual aircraft carriers. And then implemented in the Indian Ocean, the dual carrier battle group formed by the Indian Navy is actually relatively powerful. On the one hand, compared with a single ship battle group, the size of the escort ships required by a dual carrier battle group has not changed much, but the dispatch capability of carrier-based aircraft has doubled, and the corresponding air attack or air defense forces in the main threat direction have also increased. Double. For example, the Vikramaditya originally could only maintain two 4-plane MiG-29 formations in a major threat direction, but now it can maintain 4 4-plane or 16-plane formations, which is enough to carry out a large-scale air battle thought. On the other hand, with the military presence of the Chinese Navy in the Indian Ocean, we only have one escort squadron there all the year round in the Indian Ocean. The total number of our ships is quite a lot, but the vast majority of ships are deployed in the offshore or in the Western Pacific. Well, the dual aircraft carrier battle group of the Indian Navy has surpassed the Chinese Navy in combat effectiveness in the Indian Ocean. Chinese Navy dual aircraft carrier battle group. Now that the Indian Navy's dual carrier battle group is showing off so much, when can the Chinese Navy build a dual carrier battle group in the same way to show us? Big Ivan thinks that he should not be able to see it recently. On the one hand, the Chinese Navy is currently in a period of weakness for aircraft carriers, as we have said. Among the three aircraft carriers, one is being fitted out, the other is being refitted, and the other is on duty. As for the modified and outfitted aircraft carrier, the former may take more than a year, and the latter may take more than 2 years to enter service. This means that in the next year or so, the Chinese Navy will most likely maintain a Shandong ship in service. We want to see the grand operation of the dual aircraft carrier battle group, at least in the next year, not anymore. At the same time, the deployment and use of aircraft carriers by the Chinese Navy seems to be different from that of the Indian Navy. The Chinese Navy is more inclined to use a staggered deployment cycle to ensure that one aircraft carrier is at sea during 2 key periods of the year, while the other is ready to be dispatched at any time. This deployment method is actually similar to that of the US Navy. Big Ivan has counted the actions of the US Navy in the Indo-Pacific region in 2021 in the past few days, and found that the US Navy is always sailing in the Indo-Pacific region. Often, another aircraft carrier on duty in the Middle East returns to San Diego and will pass by the Indo-Pacific region, and then temporarily form a dual aircraft carrier battle group to maintain the state of dual aircraft carriers in flight for several days to a month, and then disband the formation. This kind of dual aircraft carrier battle group is actually relatively temporary. Like the US Navy, it is estimated that the Chinese Navy will also adopt this deployment mode together with the Shandong ship after the Liaoning ship is refitted in the future, that is, the Shandong ship and the Liaoning ship are dispatched alternately. Operation: maintain an aircraft carrier in the Western Pacific waters. In this case, it will basically be able to form a strategic balance with the US Navy's aircraft carrier strike group in the Western Pacific. At the same time, when the missions of the two aircraft carriers are alternating, for example, one of the aircraft carriers is about to end its duty cycle and return, and the other aircraft carrier has just dispatched to start its duty cycle. The two aircraft carriers may form a dual carrier battle group at sea, but only for a few days. But in any case, the current Chinese Navy still has only one aircraft carrier in a safe and ready state for the time being. If you want to see our dual aircraft carrier battle group, you must wait a little longer. However, with the strength of the Chinese Navy and our speed of shipbuilding, we estimate that in the future we will have more opportunities to organize dual aircraft carrier battle groups, and even form larger aircraft carrier battle groups. Isn't this more fragrant than the aircraft carrier battle group that the Indian Navy has formed 2 or 3 times so far? So just wait.